Welcome into another Key of David podcast. I am joined by Trevor Keys, and David is MIA. He said he might be joining. We don't know. So maybe he'll pop in and say hi. Don't know what's going on, but that's okay. In any event, we're doing 100 videos in 100 days. That means we've got to find people that have amazing stories. And so we decided to bring back one of our favorite guests from the past, Bryan Ferre. And Trevor's told me a ton about, dude, you got to hear Bryan Ferre's mission stories. I said, well, cool. Let's have him on the pod and let's have him tell some stories from the mission. So, Trevor, I'm going to turn it over to you. Bryan, thanks again for joining us. And let's get into some mission stories.
All right. So, just to put like the disclaimer out there to preempt any comments, these are Bryan's personal stories and experiences. These aren't revelations for other people. And this is like, we're trying to bring to you kind of like campfire conversation that you'd have with one of your good buddies that has a great story. And Bryan had some amazing things that happened on his mission. And I've been entertained by them several times, and we're hoping to get some of those out there. And I told him that this will kind of be in genealogy for his family. And he goes, that's what I'm afraid of. So, Bri, let's start wherever you want to, man. What comes to mind?
Well, so when you guys asked me to talk about my mission, you told me a couple days ago we were going to do this. And so I found this old box. That's it right there. And it's been in my storage unit for the last probably, 8 or 10 years. And it's every single thing I have left from my mission. Like when I wrote letters or my journals or whatever, everything fits in that little box, which is really, really unfortunate because I kept the most immaculate journals throughout, but somewhere in the last 20 years, they disappeared. But it was funny because I pulled out some of the letters, and basically the letters that are in there are the letters that I wrote during my first month in country. And they reminded me of some of the stories that happened during that first month. And I'll kind of preface this whole conversation with, I've shared these stories, for the last 20 years. I've shared them with my kids. I've shared them with my family. And the preface is this is just what happened. These are the experiences that I had and the people that I met. And I'm not trying to say that they were special or whatever. They just were what they were, and they changed my life. About an hour ago, I was on a podcast with a group out of the Middle East, and I was sharing some of these stories, and this Muslim guy that is a good friend of mine, he said, you can't deny the experiences that you have in life, right? Whether they're good or bad or whatever, you can't change them. So I decided tonight I'll start in the first area that I served in, because that was the time that really started to open my mind to how poignant and how close the Spirit is, especially with those that have the mantle of the missionary. And I learned very early on, while I was working there, I learned that the Spirit, when it talks to you, and you learn to hear it and you learn to recognize it, is the most powerful thing that we have as missionaries. And so I was serving in this area. It was South Auckland, so it was kind of a suburb area of the city. And we had a real problem in the town with homeless kids that had run away, basically. And they were these kids were really struggling, and I'd only been there for maybe a month and a half, and my companion and I were talking one night, and we decided we wanted to do something for these kids. And so we went over to the young men's president, and this guy, just an absolutely awesome guy, and we decided that we were going to do a Guy Fawkes night. So for those of you who are from America and you don't know about this holiday, and of course I didn't know about this holiday either, but it's a holiday that's celebrated in England and essentially the Commonwealth countries. This guy whose name was Guy Fawkes, and I actually don't know really the whole story of Guy Fawkes, but what I do know is that when you have a Guy Fawkes party, you pile flammable materials until as high as you can possibly pile them, and then you take this
like wood and
trees, and I mean we stacked it like 25 feet tall, and then you put this mannequin who is dressed up like Guy Fawkes, you put him on top of the flammable things, and then kind of like we do here in America, we celebrate with fireworks. They light this dude on fire, and they literally burn him at the stake. And I was so dumbfounded by this experience. But what we did is we got the young men's president was a truck driver, and he had this big flatbed truck, and we literally drove up and down the back streets of this town and by the bridges and where these kids would hang out. And they'd hang out there and they'd sniff glue and get high and throw up, and it was awful. Anyway, we drove around town and we just picked these kids up and put them on this truck, and we had like, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 kids on this truck, and we drove out to this farm where we were going to burn this guy in effigy. And you know, as a young, very green missionary, the idea that we were going to burn this guy at the stake was a little bit unsettling, right? Like, it's like, this is such a strange way to celebrate. But the kids,
were you starting to worry that you guys were involved in some human trafficking?
No, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there were some thoughts. So
how did you convince the kids to come? Like, what was your?
We told them we were going to do a Guy Fawkes party. Like, everybody knows Guy Fawkes, right? So anyway, they pile on this truck. We drive out there. We make this bonfire. I have pictures of it somewhere, but the flames are literally 100 feet in the air, and this dude's hair is on fire, and I'm thinking this is the most bizarre thing in the world. Well, after it was over, all the kids just had a great time, and they decided, or we started talking that we'd like to take them back to the church and maybe spend some time with them. So we took them back to the chapel, which is, the chapel is quite small, but it did have a gymnasium, sort of. And anyway, we decided that we were going to do a very untraditional missionary thing, and we were going to lock all of these kids in the church. And so look at your face. I know. So we got the young men's president, and he went and got the young women's president, and they literally chained the doors shut to the church, and we stayed.
Wait, what was the rationale? How did someone convince you that was a good idea?
I don't know. It was the Spirit, man. I don't know.
One.
So anyway, they locked us in, and we stayed there all night long, overnight. And in the morning, the Relief Society came and made breakfast, pancake breakfast and stuff. But the reason I bring it up is, as the night went on, and these kids are getting more and more, they're getting sleepier, but they're also coming down off of whatever they had been huffing a couple hours before, right? And so we were playing games and like volleyball, or not dodgeball and whatever, until about 1 o'clock in the morning. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, this Maori kid got up on the stage, and he started doing a haka. And one by one, all these kids got up on the stage, and they're all up there doing this haka, right? And it was the power of the Spirit that filled the room while these kids were doing this haka was so intense. And then after we got done, or after it ended, I got up and I told the story of Laman and Lemuel. And I had this really kind of funny way of telling it, kind of retelling it in modern terms, right? And anyway, the room was, I can't even begin to tell you, but it was the first time that I had this experience where the Spirit just took over the meeting, so to speak, right? And I spoke for probably an hour and a half, and every kid in the room is like fully intent on listening. And anyway, that we ended up within the next month, we ended up baptizing more than half of those kids, and they all became super, super active and involved, and most of them still are today, which is, you know, kind of a rarity, right? Like a lot of times you baptize people and they fall away. But anyway, that was one of the first coolest experiences that I had, and there was something going on at that time, which was kind of interesting too, and that was, it was almost Christmas time. It was in November, and the mail system, back in those days, our parents would send us money in the mail, and that's how we lived, right? I think it's different now, where the missionaries just they just handle all that, but both me and my companion hadn't gotten any money in the mail for 2 months. And so we're running really, really low on food. And we decided one day, there's every once in a while, I'm going to throw a little scripture at you, but there's this scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants that talks about an effectual prayer. And so we decided that we needed to have an effectual prayer as opposed to just a normal prayer, because we needed an effect. We need food, right? And so we studied for a couple of days. We studied this notion of an effectual prayer, which took us down all these interesting paths, and especially down the path of fasting. And fasting has always been something, at least to that point in my life, it had always been something, was just an annoyance on Fast Sunday. What do you mean we can't eat, right? Like it was never a spiritual thing. And right, not long after we had this event with these kids, I think I said this on the last episode, but we were eating oatmeal every single day. That's all we could afford, was a box of oatmeal. And so this one afternoon, we sat down and we had an effectual prayer, and we actually said, Heavenly Father, we are sitting down to have an effectual prayer. Like, we didn't know how to do it, so we wasn't making stuff up. But we were out tracting that afternoon, and we met this guy who ended up becoming one of my closest friends. Incredibly like he was just a beautiful human being, looks-wise, right? Like he could be like in a magazine kind of looks-wise. And he was a rock star. He actually was part of the U2 tour back in those days. U2 was a big deal. And anyway, so we taught this guy for probably about 2 hours, and at the end of it, we closed with a prayer like we always did, and in the prayer, we asked that our effectual prayer from earlier would happen. Like, we were both really hungry. So anyway, this guy, right when we got done, he says, "Would you guys like to go out to dinner?" And we were like, oh my gosh, we so want to go out to dinner. So those aren't the craziest stories, but those were the ones that set the stage for the rest of my experience there, because it really taught me to hear the Spirit and know how to interact with the Spirit.
So before you transition on, can you break down second grade level what you learned from this effectual prayer, and what are the components of it?
Yeah. So, well, maybe I can. I don't know. So,
best you can.
Joseph Smith talked a lot, especially later in life. He talked a lot about the inner workings of the Spirit, and how, in fact, one of my favorite quotes from Joseph Smith, and I can't remember it. I used to remember it, but it was basically that teaching the members of the church to hear the Spirit and to interact with the Spirit was like driving a corn cob into a hemlock knot. Basically impossible, right? An effectual prayer, there's actually a passage in the Doctrine and Covenants that talks about opening an effectual door. And there's a couple places where effectual is used throughout the scriptures, especially in the sort of apocryphal works. But what I learned about it is that most of our prayers are prayers. I call them prayers of desperation, right? Like we plead with God to bless us, to help us make decisions, whatever it might be. But an effectual prayer, or opening the effectual door, is when we've already made the decision and we want to know that the decision is right. And when we know that the decision is right, then that thing, whatever that thing is, will come to pass. In the Doctrine and Covenants, it talks about, if ye shall ask, believing that ye have received, ye shall receive. And so I've had a lot of experiences in my life where people tell me, or they say, I'm thinking about getting this new job, but I can't decide. So I'm going to pray and ask God what I should do. And every time, in fact, I think every time, God is always going to grant unto men according to the desires of their heart. So if you say, I want this new job, he's going to say, yep, go get that new job. Kind of like what happened with Joseph and the Lehi translations, the first
the lost manuscript.
The lost manuscript, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he went to God and said, he wants to see him. He wants to take him and show him to his wife. And God responded with, no, you can't do that. And then the guy talked him into it. And Joseph said, well, now I want to give him to him. I think we should do it. And God grants according to the desires of your heart, even unto your condemnation. So, So that was the result, right? Like, I told you not to do it and you did it. And then this is what happens. One thing that, and this is a side note, but one thing that I have come to believe for myself, and again, remember, I'm not here to teach anybody anything. These are just the things that work for me. I don't think God ever punishes people. I think we set it all up ourselves, right? I think that God and God's love for us is so perfect that it kind of like I do with my teenager, right? My teenager says, I want to go to this party. And I say, well, you're going to be too tired to get up tomorrow morning. Well, I don't care. I want to go. So I let him go, right? And then the next morning I'm pounding on, get up. And I think that's just how it works. So the process of an effectual prayer is no different than any other prayer. I think the difference is you decide in advance what you want to have happen, and it happens. It goes along with some of the sort of quantum manifestation things that you and I have talked about before.
So, Bryan, on that thought, what did you call the first prayer that we do every single day?
The prayer of desperation.
Prayer of desperation. That's a great way of calling it. So an effectual prayer, one thing that a lot of people, David and I had this conversation, and he was like, wow, I didn't know that was a thing, or that you could do that. And so my question is this an effectual prayer? Basically going to God with something specific and covenanting with him on how to accomplish it. And if you do X, Y, and Z, God will do X, Y, and Z, in return, as long as it's a just request or something like that. Is that an effectual prayer?
Yeah, but I'd modify that a little bit.
And that would just be my limited description of it, right? But,
yeah, well, first of all, we don't negotiate with God, and in my view, there's no such thing as an unjust request. I mean, if you go to God and say, I'm going to kill someone, he obviously is not going to say, well, yeah, do that, right? But if you go to God and say, I can't decide whether to buy the blue car or the white house, like, I don't think God is going to come back and say, oh, the White House for sure, the blue car, you don't want the blue car. But if you go to him and say, I decided to buy the White House, have I made the right choice? He will confirm it by the Spirit that you have or have not, right? I think the difference between an effectual prayer and the prayer of desperation is you have to own your own life, and you have to make your own decisions. And God's not going to make your decisions for you. He will confirm whether or not they're good or bad choices, for sure. That's what the gifts of the Spirit are. But I don't think, for me anyway, maybe he works in different ways for different people, but every time I have ever gone to God and say, should I do this or that, it's pretty much the stupor of thought, right? It's not like he guides our path in that way. Now, does he guide our path in other ways? 100%, right? Like the experiences that we have, I believe each of us have experiences in our life. And if you look at my life, and you know my life pretty well, Trev, you know, I've had some pretty big life-changing experiences along the way, and my path was completely, you know, kicked off the road, so to speak, when my wife died 9 years ago almost. Completely changed everything in my life. In 5 seconds, everything changed. And so I do believe those kinds of things are meant to put us in the path that we're supposed to be on. But then again, the concept of supposed to be is sort of a weird thing. I don't know that there is a supposed to be, but anyway.
So on the effectual prayer, effectual gate, or just a specific prayer, would you consider like when somebody fasts and prays for, you know, maybe someone's health, is that an effectual prayer?
Yes.
I would agree with that. Okay.
Yes.
And then in the prayer that I was talking about, you know, bringing something to God and making, I'm not saying negotiate, but it's where you're coming to God saying, hey, listen, I am giving this up. I'm laying this on the mantle. And, you know, in return, I'd ask for your help for this decision that I'm trying to make. And, you know, I feel like people do that naturally on their own, but is there a pattern for that?
Well, yeah. And so I didn't mean to make you feel bad by saying negotiate, but that sounds like a negotiation, right? If I give up this, will you give me that? And for me, that isn't how it works with God, right? You cannot go to God and say, give me this, please. He already gave you everything. Everything. You might not have accepted it yet. You might not have found it yet, but everything you ever need in your life, you already have. Everything that you want in your life, you already have. You just haven't recognized it, and you haven't achieved it, or you haven't accepted it, right? So the idea of a trade-off with God, I'm going to do this if you do that, I just don't think it works that way. It might.
So I'd propose, you know, as you're saying that, and I'm questioning it's kind of the faith and belief on something. If in the process of doing that, you made the decision, and with the outcome, and that created your faith and belief, it doesn't even necessarily have to be God that's making that happen. Your belief takes you in that pattern. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, as I said a little bit in the last time I was with you guys, you are God, right? You have the Spirit of God and the light of truth within you.
A lot of people didn't like that in the comments, bro.
I know.
But
hey, a lot of people didn't like it when Jesus said it either, and he had to remind them what it says. I think in Psalms 82 or something, where it says that your own scriptures say you're God's. So
yeah,
it is interesting.
Wasn't that the thing that they finally got him on to be able to execute him? Was the God claim?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't need any.
Pretty much.
Yeah, they didn't need to get him on anything, right? They were going to kill him one way or the other, but
that was the Talmudic law that he broke, that they were able to bring him in.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I just try to apply, and I'm taking your example or what you're sharing about effectual prayers and applying it right now.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, you know, I have this idea. I feel like it's been inspired. I'd like to go ahead and run a marketing agency, or not an agency, but I just like to have this little marketing idea where I can get clients and they subscribe for a newsletter. And
David, is this a commercial?
No, it's not a commercial.
Okay.
Please don't sign up for my newsletter.
Okay.
This is not for that. But I want to apply this to my life because it's important to me. I want to. Our last call with our previous guest was a pretty mind-blowing moment for me, and now I'm applying it to applying real life experience to what you're teaching, or at least not teaching, but your own experience that's worked for you. I like to get clients. Like to get people. I can go to networking groups. I can go to LinkedIn and find clients. But when I'm praying though, and I'm asking, you're saying that I've already have it.
Yes.
So how would I accept that based on what you're saying works for you? How would I, because if I already have it, then I just need to accept that these clients or these subscribers in the future will be in my business.
Yeah.
How do I accept that? Hey guys, if you have a second, be sure to share this episode to your friends and family on social media, whether that's Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Whenever you share this, it actually helps us to grow and to build Zion. So thank you to all those that have already been doing that, and thank you for those that are doing that now.
So I'm gonna answer that after I say I'm gonna do something else, and then I'm gonna answer that. Okay. So
Sure.
So I'm gonna tell a story. That's what I'm here to do, right? Is tell stories. And this one did not happen on my mission. This one happened a few months after I got home from my mission. When I got home, one of my favorite companions and I started a business. Maybe 6 months after we got home, we started a business, a mortgage company. And the two of us, there were actually three of us, three mission companions, but the two of us, me and Jason, we had spent many, many hours in the mission field talking about the effectual door. And so we start this mortgage company. Neither one of us knew anything about mortgages, and but we knew how to sell, and we knew how to get people to want to do their mortgages with us. But we didn't know nothing about how mortgages worked or anything like that. So we're sitting in our office one day, and we were dead broke, like literally dead broke. And we're sitting in our office, and back in those days, the different mortgage buyers would fax today's interest rates to the mortgage companies. So we would get these faxes all day long, and it would tell you what you could close loans at that day. Anyway, this one day, every morning we would come into the office and we would start with a prayer, and we would read different books with each other, and then we would go check the faxes, and Jason would always make this joke: time to get the fax, man. Anyway, so this one day we're sitting there, we get a fax, and on the fax it said that there was this guy coming to town the next day, and it was like $400 or something to go to this guy's course, and he was going to teach you in one day everything you needed to know about being a mortgage broker. And we were like, oh yeah, we definitely got to go to that. So we scraped up our money and we got tickets to go to this thing. And we're sitting in the audience, and this guy is unbelievable. He was just blowing our minds. And of course, like all of those seminars, the end of the seminar was, I have this advanced training program that's $12,000, right? Get up right now and go buy it in the back of the room. Well, we were broke, but he announced about halfway through his presentation, he announced that at the end, he was going to give one of those away. So it was a $12,000 value. And when he said it, and I know you guys are going to think this guy is so full of crap. So when he said it, Jason and I looked at each other, and we literally stood up, we went into the bathroom, and we had an effectual prayer. and during that prayer, I remember specifically saying, we would like to open an effectual door because we believe this will help our families and bless our families. We want that thing that he's going to give away. So we went back in, we finished the thing. He gets to the end, and he says, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send around this hat, and everybody put your business card in, and whichever business card I draw, that's who's going to get the thing. Well, we were so broke, we didn't even have business cards. So I turned to the guy to my left, he turned to the guy to his right, we got business cards, and we wrote down our names and scribbled out on the front of the guy's business card, we wrote down our names on the back of the business card, put it in. Now, you can say whatever you want. It was a coincidence, whatever. You can say whatever you want, but we won it. And that, for me, is exactly how prayer combined with quantum manifestation, that's how it works. You be really specific about what you want, you pray with real intent, and you make it happen. Now, maybe in another episode we can talk about how I think that actually works, because I don't think God went, I think it's a lot different than that, but
I know you're about to answer the question I asked earlier, but just to understand what you just said, because I heard something there. I don't know if I heard you define what I heard. So let me. What I'm trying to.
That sounded like
I know
a
you
Kamala
know that I
statement.
know I know it.
If you feel smarter after that statement, raise your hand.
Did you hear what Bryan said? It sounded like a Kamala statement.
It was a great word salad. Great job.
Go ahead.
The occurrences of this occurrence is such an occurrence. What I'm trying to actually ask is, when I heard you say your prayer, you said with your former companion, now business partner, we want that thing because we
Yes.
believe it will do this thing.
Yes.
And that second part, I didn't hear you define that, but you basically declared that, hey, we want this, and this is the reason why we want it.
It wasn't the reason. It was
Okay.
it was the outcome. And I think that's really, really important. So I'm not here to plug any of my work, but if you read my book, one of the chapters is a chapter called Because. And you just said, and because is the most misunderstood word in the English language, because we use it as though we're defining a reason. And that's not what the word says. The word says it is the be cause. It is the cause of something. So instead of saying, I'm making I'm justifying why I want something, that's not what you're doing. What you're doing is defining the outcome of getting that something. And I would encourage you to go back and read the story of Nephi obtaining the plates from Laban, because that everything I just described to you is in that story. When Nephi was told that he needed to go in and get the plates, there was a because. The cause is that the entire nation shouldn't dwindle in unbelief, right? That's the outcome, right?
Oh,
go ahead.
I wonder if we could also look at the other Nephi, that was the brother of Lehi, when he asked the Lord, instead of a war, that there would be a famine, and then he ends up, basically causing the rains to stop.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
I mean, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think you could go and do it with every story in Scripture. The story of the brother of Jared, right? The fascinating part about the story of the brother Jared is that when he said, "How are we going to see?" What was he expecting? He was expecting God to say, "Well, I'll put some light bulbs in there," right? And how did God answer? God answered with, "Well, you tell me. You tell me how you're going to see." And
I see.
And I think that's where, at least for me in my life, and I hate to keep prefacing it that way, I'm trying to stave off some of the people that are going to talk bad about me on there, but that's the whole point. God put you here to be God. He put you here to be Him, to become like Him. And that word, because, and the word become, like we use those words as though to become is something I'm going to do in the future, right? I'm going to become like God in the future. Well, the only thing that's preventing you becoming like God in the future is that you're not becoming like God now. So we use those words like, I'm going to do it someday. Well, yeah, you're right. You will do it someday. You just might as well do it today.
Yeah, I think what it boils down to, Napoleon Hill has this quote, and it's one of my favorite quotes. It says, "Action is the true measure of intelligence." Just because a person fasts, prays, is obedient, and they're asking God, doesn't mean that things happen. Things happen because you make things happen, and God makes it happen because you're making it happen, because He can't do anything with somebody who's just sitting there waiting for something to happen. But if you go out there and you're taking action, that's when you can see the power of God's hands in things, especially things you're praying for. That's why the brother Jared was like, here, take these stones. He could have taken anything. Take these stones. make these stones.
Yeah.
It was my brother Jared's idea, and God's like, hey, cool. You took action. You came up with the plan. I'll do that for you.
Yeah, and that's really, if you can do it on that sort of granular level of everyday life, but you can also look at it as the entire mission of Joseph Smith, right? Like, it wasn't like God came down and shook Joseph Smith and said, hey, I need to talk to you. He showed up when Joseph showed up. When Joseph showed up and said, I am willing to ask God because I know he won't punish me if I ask. And that led to the restoration.
Totally. Okay, let's dive back in to, there's a mission story that on our pre-call, I'm like, I want to hear that story. It was a story that Trevor was telling back to you. You're like, dude, it happened to me. It's like one of the greatest things that happened to me. You don't need to tell me my own story.
Yeah, wow.
I want to hear that story.
Okay, so, yeah, like I said last time, I can literally talk for hours about the things that I experienced while I was in New Zealand, but one in particular, and this one isn't any better or more important to me than any of them because they are all very important.
Right. One thing before you go, pull your hat back a little, or you like your brim, or look at the camera more, because
my camera's just a really bad camera.
The thing keeps going like this, and I want to see your face.
All right, I'll just sit back like this.
All right.
So I had been on my mission for it was pretty much about 6 months from being done, maybe a little bit more. I got transferred to basically the farthest north part of New Zealand that you can serve in. And I'm going to tell a couple of things that led up to the experience because it's important to understand sort of what was going on. So when I first got there, my companion was a greenie right off the boat, or fresh off the boat, as we used to say. And he and I got transferred to this area called Kamo. And so we both got there the same day. So neither one of us knew anything about the area. It wasn't like one had been there for a while and the new guy came in. We were just both like thrown into this place. And we were in the country. So houses are a long, long distance in between each other. And so the first part of the story is kind of funny, but it's important for you to understand. So that night, we decided we were going to go. We had a map, and we saw where the missionaries had been working before. So we decided we were going to go to this little area where there was kind of a cluster of houses, and it was about 4:00 in the afternoon. And we took off from our house, and it on the map, it only looked like it was maybe 1.5 miles from where we lived. And anyway, we leave our house and we're on our bikes, and we come to a canyon, essentially, this really steep hill down and really steep hill back up to get to where we were going. And I was like, oh man, I don't want to freaking do that. But we did it. We rode our bikes down this big hill. It took forever to get up the other side. And when we got up on the other side, I realized, right as we're pulling into this little village, I realized that we were in wine country. And it just so happened that night, that weekend, was the wine festival. And so we pull into this town. There's probably 800 or 900 people wandering around, and there's like wine tasting going on at all these different places. And we realized really quickly that everyone that was there was hammered. And anyway, so we turned down this little road, and a bunch of guys, kind of hoodlum type dudes, started chasing us. And they had kind of blocked off the road, so we decided to go down this other way. Anyway, we got to the end of that, and they're coming after us. They're screaming and yelling that they're going to beat us up. And so we just decided we were going to drop our bikes, and we were going to run down that canyon and up the other side. And as we dropped down into the canyon, what looked like this lush grass hill. Like it looked like you could just lay down and roll down this hill. We got down in there about maybe 100 feet, and as more and more as we went, this grass is getting higher and higher. Eventually it's up to our bellies, and then up to our chest, and then over our heads. And this isn't grass. These are like, it looks like grass, but they got little teeny thorns on them. And so we're running through this grass, and our arms are just getting thrashed. Our faces are just getting thrashed, and our shirts are bloody. And we just look like, we look really bad. Anyway, we got down at the bottom, and we came out the bottom of this thing, and now we're in a different neighborhood. And this lady was walking down the side of the road, and she saw us. She's like, "Oh my gosh, elders, are you guys okay? What happened?" And we're just bleeding everywhere. And so she like gets us and takes us into her house and cleans us all up and stuff. And this was the first time that I had ever met her. And we sat and talked to her for a little bit. We're both like just, frustrated and kind of mad or whatever. And we asked her, because she knew that we were elders, we asked her if she was a member of the church. And she said, "Yes, I was raised in the church. I haven't been to church in a long, long time." And I said, "Well, how come you don't come to church?" And she said, "Because the angels scare me." And I thought, man, that's a weird thing to say. And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, when you're sitting in the audience and the guys are up on the stand and the angels are just everywhere around them, they just scare me." And I was like, okay, yeah, I guess I get that. And so I didn't know what to say. And so anyway, she ended up driving us home. We both showered and went about our work. And I'll tell you a couple things. We had some really cool experiences while we were together. We were together about a month and a half. And one day, and this one isn't necessarily timed correctly, but we got a car, and so we could get to all the outer areas that we covered. They finally gave us a car. So anyway, we are heading up north. And we're going, New Zealand's very hilly, right? You're going over these hills and whatnot. And we come up this hill and around this corner, and out in the middle of this field, literally out in the middle of a field, there is an LDS chapel that is the size of a chapel from Utah. Like most of the chapels there are really small, but this was like a big stake center type thing. And we were like, no one told us that was there. And so we pulled off and went into there, and the missionaries always knew where the keys to the church were. And so we got the key and we walk in, and the place is like everything in there. There's like an inch of dust on everything. And the building hadn't been used in a long, long time. And we thought, man, this is really weird. So we ended up calling the mission home, and sure enough, there was basically a whole stake that went inactive, and they hadn't used the building in a long time. And so we decided we were going to come back the next day and clean it. We cleaned it, and we knelt down in prayer, and while we were in the chapel, and we basically told God that we were going to get this chapel filled back up again. That was going to be our job. And total side note, by the time we left, there was over 100 people active, and they were using it again. So that was the kind of area that we were in. In fact, one of the other companions that were there, the other missionaries that were there, were out tracking one day, and they knocked on this guy's house, and he opened the door, and, "Oh, elders, hey, come on in." And they go in, and he's got a bookshelf kind of similar to mine, got every church book there ever was written. And so the senior companion, my friend Todd, was like, "So are you a member of the church?" And he says, "Yeah, I think I'm the stake president." And these guys, anyway, so it was awesome. We had a great experience there. But back to the story that Trevor was talking about. So that woman who saved us that night, we became quite close with their family, and we would go and teach them, her and the kids and her husband, maybe 3 or 4 times every couple of days we'd go to their house and share a message or whatever. And her husband was a spiritual giant. They were completely less active. They didn't go to church at all, but he was just incredible. In fact, this is all inspired by him. But anyway,
were they Maori or were they white?
Maori, yeah. And so anyway,
hey, just so you know, when you correct me on how I pronounce Maui, Maori or whatever, I feel like you're Obama telling me how to pronounce something. Just so you know.
Sorry, this is going to be on TV, man. You got to say it right.
Maori.
Anyway, so we became really close with this family, and one night we decided to do. We call them splits, or trade-offs. I don't know what you guys call them, but we decided to do that. Splits, yeah. So we decided to do that, and Tom, her husband, was going to go with me, and my companion went with this other guy from the ward. I don't remember who it was, but anyway, Tom and I went and we taught this guy who was in our records that he had been taught before, and it turns out that he had been meeting with the missionaries for almost 20 years. And his wife was a member and very active, but he just would not ever, he would never join the church. And sometimes he'd go with her, but whatever. So we went, and I was doing the teaching part, and Tom was just there to be supportive, right? And we were doing I think I was talking about the Book of Mormon and the witness of Christ. I don't even remember, but I was about ready to get to the, I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to call you to be baptized. And Tom cut me off. And this guy was a Pakia. This guy was white. And Tom cut me off, and he stood up, and Tom's only like maybe 4 or 5. Like, he's a real short guy, but he stood up, and in Māori, he started speaking in Māori, and it was so powerful. Like, he was, I mean, it was like he was into it, right? And it was crazy because me and the guy knew exactly what he was saying, and it was the most powerful testimony of Christ you have ever heard in your life. It was, and the Māori, when the Māori speak, they speak from here. It's kind of like the Japanese, right? They speak from down here, and the power of it was it was palpable. And he got done, and it was like in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Like, it was. And
did he actually say in the name of Jesus Christ?
Oh yeah. He closed it off in English.
Wow.
And both me and this guy, the guy's wife was in the other room, but me and this guy are just bawling. I mean, the tears are just flowing. And he got done, and the guy turned to me, and he put his hand out, and he said, "I'd like to be baptized on Saturday."
Whoa.
And I was like, wow. I mean, this guy's been seeing the missionaries for 20 years. And so Tom and I are walking home, and we're talking about this just amazing thing. And I was like, "Tom, where did that come from?" And he explained to me that, he goes, you Pakia, that's white. By the way, Pakia means white rat, but he's
David likes that. Did you see David? David's
well, that's what it means.
Did you see what? David.
So anyway.
Wait, how do you pronounce that? I need to hear it one more.
Pakia.
David's gonna be that. David's a little slur, dude.
You guys have seen the You guys have seen the famous haka, right? Like,
oh yeah, sure.
They go. In that, it there's a line, and I can't remember how it goes, but it's basically Pakia la 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 la, right? And they're basically saying, "You white rat, come over here, and I'm gonna cut your tongue off and eat it." Like, that's basically what it is. That's not exactly the translation.
Very nice.
But anyway, so we're walking home. We had this really just amazing experience, and we get to his house. A neighbor takes us home, and we're walking into the house, and me and my companion are talking about, how was your night, whatever. And I was explaining just what an amazing night it was. And we go into our house, and we were getting ready for bed, and we had our prayer, and we crawled into bed. And maybe about 15 minutes after we had turned out the lights, Sarah, Tom's wife, walked into our room, and I was at first like shocked, like why are you in our room? And she walked in. She had this very peaceful look on her face, and she said to me, she said,